Hello everyone, I'm Tyler and welcome to the Endless Mountain of Monsters. Killian, Alex, Charles, and I have spent the last few months working on this, our magnum opus, if you will. Endless Mountain of Monsters, or EMOM, if you will, is a two-dimensional turn-based combat. You, as the player, control a group of 4 heroes seeking to reach the top of the seemingly endless mountain of monsters. Your party of 4 heroes, the Paladin, the Assassin, the Wizard, and the Alchemist, must climb as high as they can. Our project was originally very large in scope. We planned on having a long list of features that we absolutely wanted to have in the game, but as we got further and further into development, the more and more complicated tasks became, and the realization that we were going to have to cut some corners came into full view. We were going to have a buff and debuff system that allowed heroes and enemies to get stronger or weaker, a positioning system where certain moves could only hit certain enemies, a hit chance system for attacks to sometimes miss their target, a stun debuff to skip players' turns, larger enemies, bosses, damage types, harder AI, a hard mode, stat tracking, a tutorial, multiple different heroes to choose from. When the list of must-haves goes on forever, it's pretty obvious that scope creep is real. Now, as you see before you, this is what we have compromised upon. A combat system that is more simplistic than we wished for, but fully functional, which is much better than what it may have looked like if we didn't cut back. A shop system to buff your character's stats that holds the information between the shop and combat, and a gameplay loop that slowly allows the player to become stronger and stronger as time goes on, if they can survive. Our main constraint truly seemed to be time. So our group actually started all the way back in October, I believe. So while everybody else was choosing out their IDEs, we were starting on our project and already whipping up like the first few GUI things and a few snippets of code. And here we are. It is December 6th today.
Yeah, last stuff was added today.
Yeah, I just finished that about 2 hours ago.
Last minute, to say the least. So first off, we've got our logo here front and center. This was actually made using generative AI, surprisingly. So yes, it's as bad as everybody thinks. Designers are getting put out of jobs. I made this for free. Endless Mountain of Monsters is the name of the project that we started on, and then of course we've got our button here with just a simple on hover to change the color, and that's used quite a bit throughout, just to show that there's some interactivity that the user can have for it, and of course the frame to show the outline of it. And if we hit enter game here we are. Same screen, of course. We have it that way so that full screen can actually stay throughout all the other tabs. It doesn't really work any other way. And of course, we've got the background music playing now. And a little thing that if you click here, obviously it exits our game. And so, upon clicking this button, we are thrown into a game. Alright, so here we are in our scene with our 4 heroes on the left and our 4 enemies on the right. Of course, the enemies are randomly selected from an array, and so we have 4 random enemies in here. Our background is also randomly generated from a small list of backgrounds that we have. At the top here, you'll see our round counter as well, which is also a variable, which shows how many rounds have passed depending on if characters have taken their turns or not. We can tell that our characters have taken their turns or not based off these little yellow boxes here, right next to the health bars. As you can see, this zombie peasant has already taken his turn, so he has no yellow ticker next to him. The next thing, obviously, would be our health bars. You can hover over any health bar that you see to reveal the actual health value of the enemy. You'll see that our Crusader is now at 63 hit points, down from whatever his max health was before. And same thing with our Assassin who's been attacked, he's at 45. On the left here, you can see our hero's name. This is our Assassin, his name is Damien, and you can tell he's selected based off of this yellow indicator here below him. On the left, just below his name, you can see how much damage he does and his crit chance. These are base values that our skills pull from in order to decide how much damage to deal. Also, if you hover over the enemy, you can easily see that there's some interactivity between us and them. This red indicator below indicates that we can attack this target. When we hover over an enemy, its name will be displayed on the right side. A few status effects in the bottom right will be displayed, which we ended up not implementing. As for our buttons here in the center of the screen, let's start with the one all the way on the right. This button will skip our turn. As you can see, our yellow indicator next to our assassin is gone, and his turn has been skipped. And now we're on to Reynald, our alchemist. Here we can see Reynald's skills here at the bottom, and upon clicking a skill name and a skill description will show up below his name. This skill is Acid Puddle, which throws a poison vial at the enemies. And of course, we can take this skill and click on any of the enemies that we want to. Since I can tell that the zombie peasant has less maximum HP than the other targets, I'm going to go after him first. There we go. We've attacked the zombie peasant, and as you can see, the zombie peasant has taken damage. His HP went from 18 to 13, and also, the giant slammer here on the left has also taken damage. This is because the alchemist's attack was area of effect, meaning it can hit multiple targets at once. Same thing goes for something like our paladin Dismas here. He has a skill called Radiance, which calls down radiant light to deal damage to all enemies. So, any enemy that we click on will deal damage to the entire team. And it seems we've had a very bad stroke of luck. Our enemies have left some of our heroes downed or at death's door. You can tell that a character is down based off of their down sprite, and also their health bar is now empty. You can tell that a hero has hit death's door when they are on 1 HP. We created the death's door mechanic with the idea in mind that we wanted to give our heroes one last chance to fight back before they went down for good. With our final breath, we can at least take out this zombie peasant before we die. Dying, though, gives us a perfect opportunity to show off our next screen, the end game screen. As you can see on this screen, we just have a few simple GUI elements, a background that's always placed in, this card that says Game Over, always placed in, and 2 buttons, of course, New Journey, which brings us back to a new game, and Exit Game, which exits our application to the main menu. And of course, if you have a little bit better luck than that, you might see something like this. And then, at the end of the round, of course, you'll see our gold earned screen, which gives a total of the gold that you earned from that combat, which of course will be variable as well depending on how difficult the enemies were. And, of course, our shop button at the bottom that we are able to click on now.
So, what we have going on here is each enemy has a certain amount of gold that they would give, and you get that at the end of the round. You will see at the top left the exit shop button. That is how you would leave the shop after purchasing whatever items you want. Currently, we do not have enough gold for any of the items. After selecting whatever item you would want, you would then select the character that you would want to apply the bonus to, which will highlight them. Then you would just need to press the purchase button. And as you press the purchase button, it will show not enough gold. So all that is left is to exit the shop.
And you'll see our character's health values are the same as where they left off, and you move on to the next combat.
Okay, so these 4 skill buttons here are what caused me personally the most pain out of the entire project. What ended up happening was the buttons for each character were layered on top of each other. So when it was the paladin's turn, because he was first in line, his skills were at the top, and they worked fine. They would describe the skill, they would do everything you wanted them to, and then when it was anybody else's turn, if you clicked on the skill, you'd basically be clicking on the invisible button of the paladin, and so it wouldn't display any of their information because we had set the description to blank out when it wasn't their turn. So you were clicking on a button that told the program to not display anything. Getting that figured out was definitely the most frustrating part of the project that I experienced.
Of course, for our project, we used JavaFX. It also became very clear very quickly that Jing was in fact right, and JavaFX is not made for making games. Pulling off what we have here has taken thousands of lines of code, and attempting to make something three-dimensional or real-time action-based sounds unfathomable. However, for a game where all we need to do is create images on a screen with a few animations and wait for user input, it works perfectly.
So either I can
rearrange
the skills. Wait, which one did you use? Because
that was the first one on Alchemist, and it's just one shot.
The first one on Alchemist. All right, let me take a look at that.
Okay, maybe that's not the right way to put it. It works perfectly enough. Just enough, in fact, for us to climb out of the hole we have dug ourselves into and fall right into another. Quite a few times during coding, we found issues that would have ruined the entire project, and of course, just before giving up and conceding, Java would give us a tiny trail of crumbs to follow that kept us moving forwards. It wasn't all doom and gloom though. Our team had a solid strategy. We split up into different specializations in the beginning, and towards the end, we took all of our finished sections and joined them together to make a finished product. I worked on implementing sound effects, implementing animations and transitions, and integrating assets into the project.
I worked on combat flow, combat actuality, damage calls, GUI implementation, and method calling, enemy abilities, and a few other things.
I worked on the shop items, shop implementation, classes for the heroes and characters. I made the money class, and I also made the assets for the characters and the enemies. I found the sound effects that we would be using, and I worked on the diagrams.
And I worked on the character stats, the character abilities, the combat flow, heal class, damage class, and more.
Our process for making decisions was to come together as a group, discuss what we were having problems with, gather all the solutions that we could think of to that problem, and take a vote on what we thought were the best outcomes for that specific situation. Of course, with the amount of time that we had left, a lot of these decisions really came down to, is this absolutely necessary for what we're making, or is this a Christmas wish list? We distributed the work based on what everybody had the most experience with. I had the most experience with JavaFX, so I ended up doing a lot of the GUI with the buttons and whatnot. The kind of idea for the project, it's based off of a game called Darkest Dungeon, and so a lot of the assets that we used for our project were actually used from their game. And I mean a lot of them, from the sound effects to the buttons to the character ideas and a few other things. A lot of it we made ourselves or with a few separate tweaks, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, so I started off making the different character classes. Unfortunately, we originally had thoughts of doing healing and buffs and debuffs and poisons and burns and oh my. But in the end, that ended up being just a little bit above the time that we had available to work on things. So basically, we just took all of the healing classes out more or less last minute and came up with some new abilities so that everybody had damaging abilities. And in each of the classes, I basically just set the abilities to do a percentage of the damage of the character's base damage. So like with the paladin, we got a shield bash, a smite, a radiance that does damage to everybody, and dismember, which is just a flesh wound. So all sorts of different like abilities that fit the characters.
At the start of everything, Charles had already written the character classes, and I knew that for the sake of bringing this all together, if they were structured similarly, that would make mixing everything together when we got to that point a lot easier. So tried to kind of develop them in a way where they had similar statistics, and then kind of a similar setup with abilities where they take the base damage and do varying amounts or versions of it. Both the enemy team and the player team have enemy team array and player team array files. The enemy team one has functions to instantiate each individual enemy and then randomly select them and add them to a team, which even had potential in the works for difficulty customization for the hard mode that we talked about earlier. Whereas the player team array is a lot more basic, and it was just kind of primarily for the purpose of being able to iterate over the player team to see if they had all been knocked for the game over sequence. Pretty much all that stuff that with the characters that Charles talked about, and then all the enemies all came together in the combat flow file. Kana was just a powerhouse holding everything together that Charles and I both worked on. Each time combat was entered, it would create an enemy team. It would adjust speed statistic for each player character and enemy, and then order them for a turn order based on those speeds. There's functions for processing the enemy damage based on the ability that was randomly selected. And it kind of all just fell together last minute to process and handle all that data correctly.
Yeah, I think I can speak for everybody when I say that linking those skills and getting those button clicks was an undertaking.
Yeah, arguably one of the biggest tasks, I would say, as far as implementing the combat data into the GUI.
only a couple of nights up until 8 a.m. It's fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't even getting the skills to work. It was getting the skills when you click the button to display the information for the skills, and it just nothing was working. And then I threw in a couple of sysouts just to see if clicking the button even was registering in the game itself, and we found out that it wasn't, and that just opened a whole can of worms of, well, if we can't even tell that we're clicking the button, how are we supposed to click the button and get a skill to work? And Killian ended up actually figuring out how to do it, and I can't even begin to.
That was seriously a team effort, though, because, you had that initial eureka moment of figuring out what the problem was, that whole situation of, the buttons aren't even being clickable, and we had both hit a pretty hopeless point, I think, bouncing our panic off from each other, and then luckily Tyler, again, having more experience with, the GUI elements specifically, kind of had an idea on, rather than handling the buttons themselves, to apply it to the container holding the button. So then I was able to kind of combine everything Charles and I had talked about with that transparency and visibility that Tyler had talked about, and we managed to get it together, but being as last minute as that was, it definitely was a very scary moment of are we going to lose this entire feature last minute?
Yeah, and I think as Tyler said, the game without varying damages from skills is just not even what we were close to wanting to get. That would have been a major downgrade if the skills didn't work. So I'm glad that it did end up getting figured out, even if it was the very last second.
I worked on the character assets as well as the enemies, as I suggested using a software to use, which everyone else liked how that turned out, so we ended up going with that to get the characters and get the assets, and I made each separate individual ones for their attacks, idles, downed. After that, I also sifted through sound files that Tyler ripped to get some of the attack audio. I had a good few hours of going through a lot of different things. I also set up a lot of the classes and worked on a few in their entirety. Then what I mainly worked on was related to the shop, which included the shop code, item code, and money code. Got all that, and then finally I stitched all of that together and then had that work with the UI.
We also did end up creating a Kanban board using Jira, but we didn't really end up using it very much, just for moving a few things around and getting our ideas organized, but we never really ended up changing or moving things around. Overall though, we're fairly satisfied with the product that we produced. I mean, we really truly wanted to add a lot more to this project, but time constraints and our coding software held us back from creating our dream product. Our team dynamics were good, with everyone being very open-minded to each other's ideas, but also standing their ground when concepts they absolutely wanted came into question. It worked well to have a voting system more than a single person just deciding everything, because at least then more people could have a say in what they want. In my personal experience, if you're working on a project that you care about and are excited about, it's way easier than something you don't. Get an early start on our project, because we started our project... we probably started in...
I think we started in October, honestly.
Yeah, October.
Yeah.
We probably started in October, and, I mean, we're still, we just finished up today, Lower your expectations. I know that sounds really bad.
Agreed.
But, I mean...
Lower your expectations when you only have 3 months and 4 people.
That's what I was going to say, yeah. Expectations based on your time frame, honestly.
Yeah.
In a good way.
In a good way.
One of the biggest things that I wish we would have started doing at the very beginning of the class was definitely meeting in Discord and sharing screens and going over problems that each of us are having, because having somebody to just bounce ideas off of back and forth and problem solve makes the entire process that much easier.
We had a lot of trouble with GitHub and JavaFX in general doing our project.
It's like every time that we pushed and pulled, each one of us had our own specific way that our libraries had to be written in our personal program in order for them to work. So we had to just remove and re-add them every single time that we updated our code.
Yeah, I had a scenario where I had GitHub just completely break down, and I just lost a bunch of code that I was working on.
Last but not least, JavaFX is not made for making games.
Yeah, it would have been better to use a different thing. Unity, anything would have been better.
This
It's
is
even
our this is our public apology to Jing.